Great. Well,
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks everybody for joining us for the last session of the first day of the Enterprise UX Virtual Summit. It's great to have everybody here today. In this session, we have Omkar and Julia, who Julia most recently worked at IBM, and Omkar currently works at IBM right now. And they're going to be sharing a very interesting and I think very applicable case study about how they adapted personas specifically for enterprise work. So, of course, you know, B2B products. And just to answer a few questions up front, all the sessions will be sent through email, recorded afterwards next week, and we will have them present, and then we will go into about 15 minutes of Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions, feel free to just drop them in the Q&A box, and we will get to them at the end, as many of them as we can. So with that being said, I'll kick this over to Omkar and Julia, and we can begin.
Great, thanks. So, howdy y'all. We're calling in from Austin, Texas. I'm Julia Byron. I'm a user experience designer and user researcher with the Innovation Office at the City of Austin.
And hello everyone, I'm Omkar. I'm also a UX designer and researcher at IBM Design and in their Austin studio. So today we're going to talk about team personas, which is something that we developed while designing for enterprise products at IBM.
So this is not just an explanation of our framework, but this is a story also about pain and redemption of our research team.
That's right. So before we get started here,
we have a question we want you to think about. Do your users work individually on their tasks? Or do they work together to accomplish their tasks? So our users work together to accomplish their tasks. All of you use mobile apps on your smartphones, right? So our users are teams that build mobile apps for people like you. So here's an example of what one such team might look like.
And our products are meant to satisfy team needs and not individual needs. So when we came in, our colleagues were using three personas. We had Archer, who was an architect. We had Anna, who was the mobile developer. We had Brad, who was the web developer. And this is an example of one of our products. And at the beginning, it asked if you're creating a web or mobile app. And during the remainder of the flow, it helped either Anna or Brad create that mobile or web app. So our designs really ignore the fact that Archer, Anna, and Brad are working together to create web and mobile versions of the same app. And so it basically instead forced them into these siloed experiences.
Additionally, our designs failed at capturing what happens when different Annas work together. How do they pick up where the other one left off?
So we needed something that captured both individual needs and the patterns of collaboration.
So by taking individuals out of the context of their teams, these personas never accurately reflected our users. We struggled to design without understanding our users and lost credibility with our product team.
So we decided to investigate further to better understand our target audience. And we conducted 42 interviews across 11 different development teams, looking to create better personas based on the needs and goals of our developers. But what we saw was that the needs and goals of the developers were influenced by the type of team that they worked in. And that really made us realize how that we need to understand that how individual users work together as teams. And we started to look at the data through different types of teams and what roles and work was necessary in those teams.
So at the end of our project, we had a framework to represent the reality of our users, which also finally resonated with our colleagues and got us that alignment we really needed. So the first lesson we learned was to understand team needs and not just individual needs when you're working on products that are reliant on user collaboration.
So now all that sounds dandy, but our problems did not stop there. So another question that I want you guys to think through in your minds is, have you ever done research that you're excited about and had that fall flat when you presented it to your team? So we also had that, and we used to do all this work to get answers to big problems. We super pumped about sharing them with our colleagues, and they wouldn't use any of it. And this was bad for our colleagues because they didn't understand our users, so we kept struggling to deliver.
So once we got our aha moments during research, we would feel really accomplished. But by just presenting that, we didn't let our team have those aha moments too. Since they did not attend the user sessions, our team didn't gain that empathy and understanding. Because it was just Omkar and I presenting our findings, they weren't able to internalize the research.
So it was as if we were writing these travel journals. And the thing about writing travel journals is that it's your story and it's your perspectives. But on the other hand, when you talk about tour guides, the thing about tour guides is that they walk you through something and it becomes your experience. So another thing that's pretty good about being on a tour is that they walk you through something in one day that probably took you like months to learn. And that's what our mentors, Alice Clark, told us. Think like tour guides and not like travel writers.
Another one of our mentors, Todd Wilkins, told us it's not about creating beautiful maps, but the process of mapping. So we held a workshop where we brought our colleagues in halfway after we synthesized the data and analyzed together to come up with opportunities. Because it went from a one-way presentation to an actual conversation among colleagues, at the end of this, everyone on the team had internalized the research really well and were able to speak about the users. By bringing in our team during research analysis, we captured more perspectives than Omkar and I would have thought of on our own. So it shed more light on every insight.
And Julia and Omkar, sorry to just stop you guys here real quick. There's some feedback that the audio is a little bit choppy there. I'm not sure if you guys are running through computer audio.
Should we call in from the?
We could call in from.
We'll call in from the phone.
Okay,
yeah.
Maybe try calling in and let's try it that way. There was a little bit of time I was hearing it too, but we can try that.
Okay, thank you.
It'll just be one moment here. Yeah, thanks guys for thanks everybody for the feedback there. It's good to know that it wasn't just me. Yeah, no problem. These little roadblocks always seem to happen.
Sorry, where can we find that call-in information again?
That should be in your participant. Should be in the participant email, or sorry, the panelist email that was sent over to you. Let me check.
Okay, got it.
Okay.
Let's pause our share for just a second and open up that email.
Sure. Yeah, thanks everybody for bearing with us. Yeah, they have a separate ID number actually because they're panelists. But it shouldn't take more than a minute here. Yeah, no worries though. Thanks for helping out. No, we won't lose their video. It should be just fine. Oh, is this better? Do you hear my microphone better, Melissa? Cool, no problem. I will speak a little bit closer into the microphone. Yeah, I'm going to pull up their information here real quick and get them dialed in. So just give me one moment.
Hey guys, can you hear us?
Yep, I hear you.
Okay, great.
Yeah, no echo now. Perfect.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. Sorry about that.
Fantastic. No worries at all. Thanks for kind of doing that real quick on the fly there. Great. So we can get right back into it now.
Okay, great. And we'll share from where we were?
Yep. Just pick up
Okay,
where
great.
we left off.
Thanks.
Cool.
Okay, so because
Awesome.
it went, oh, all right, sorry. Okay. Now, because it went from a one-way presentation to an actual conversation among colleagues, at the end of this, everyone had internalized the research really well and were able to speak about the users. By bringing in our colleagues during that research analysis, we captured more perspectives than Omkar and I would have thought of on our own. It shed more light on every insight.
So the second lesson that we learned here was, instead of just presenting a research analysis, walk your colleagues through the data in an immersive manner and let them contribute their own insights to the analysis.
Now, there was one more lesson that Omkar and I had to learn to make team personas effective. Now think about this for a moment. After personas are made, does your team successfully translate information from personas into product outcomes? Ours didn't. First, everyone would interpret the success criteria of a user experience differently. Second, even after understanding user needs, our colleagues would ignore them because they would get wrapped up in their day-to-day responsibilities and pressures of delivering. And this led to a pretty poor user experience.
Yep. So our colleagues did not have a set of standards for the user needs that they could follow in the personas. So what they already knew really trumped what they had heard from our research. So they set success criteria according to their own interpretation and according to their own convenience. So what we needed to translate those needs into clear success criteria that the whole team could follow and benchmark against. So what made this successful was creating measurable principles, sort of like a guiding light. And all the user feedback, all the conversations were then centered around fulfilling or measuring against those design principles or measurable principles.
So now the conversation changed towards a mutual agreement toward design principles derived from the research. It also became a way for research and design to advocate for the user and not let important things get scoped out. So for the first time, we were able to not only get the user needs into the product, but clearly demonstrate that.
Yep.
So the third lesson we learned was to create measurable principles in context to the user needs you have on the team personas. So this is how we went from our product team churning, our users not getting their needs met, Omkar and I struggling with failure, to redeeming ourselves by uniting our product team to create something really useful for our users.
Yep. And the reason why this happened was because we started doing the following. First, understanding the user's team dynamics. Second, mapping these out with our colleagues. And finally, using measurable principles as a guiding light. And these three are the components of a team persona.
So now let's talk about what team persona artifacts look like. They are a collection of data points and implications for your product team to consider. A data point could be a user quote or a summary of relevant user quotes. An implication would either come down to something like a need statement or a design principle. Remember that the goal behind implications is to make this artifact something actionable for the team.
Yep. So let's look at our template of the team persona. First, we created a team name, a photograph of the team, of the work environment that the team was in, and a quote. Then we added the key members of the team and an excerpt about each of those roles with an actionable implication. We finally also included the overview of the team so that it speaks to their common goals, their motivations, and struggles. And finally, we depicted a map that shows the key points of collaboration between the team members. Now, let's look at the template for the journey for that team. So first, we listed down all the key team players. And across the top, we created the columns with high-level steps. Then under each step, we would include in detail the tasks, the opinions, and collaboration of members partaking in that step. And then we added the quotes which captured the crux of that step. And finally, we added the implications that we had created earlier with our product team.
So this is an example of our final product. Just to reiterate, this is not a typical persona. A typical persona is a generative tool created by the researcher that depicts individual users. We reconsidered the user research standard for our enterprise domain by understanding users' team dynamics. These also are the work of our whole products group, not just the researchers. And finally, we took it from a generative tool and turned it to something that could also be an evaluative tool by making it actionable.
Yep. So next, I want to show you the steps for creating our team personas. First off, we identified the target users from our clients and potential clients. And then we did a whole team interview where we interviewed the entire team to get a picture of that organization. Next, we interviewed the key team players individually. And at the end, we had interviewed around 42 users from 11 different teams. Now, once we had all that data, we started clustering these data points from these interviews from all those 11 teams. And we took those data clusters and condensed them into journeys and overviews based on those common goals and team dynamics. So just going back to our metaphor there, like tour guide, they walk you through the key places that are key to the identity of the city. We also curated the data points that were key to the identity of that team persona.
Then we gathered both our local and remote colleagues together for a workshop. We walked them through our journeys and our overviews. Sometimes we would do role playing with everybody involved to keep them engaged. And then sometimes Omkar and I would just do a readout so that people could really focus on listening and learning. While this was happening, everybody noted down insights and questions. Then we had everybody paste their insights and questions on the board, and we discussed and prioritized the most important insights. And next, we turned the insights into need statements. So for example, an insight could be developers cannot evaluate our tool before they provide product recommendations. So we turned that into something actionable like developers need to be able to try our product before buying so that they know it offers everything they're looking for.
Yep. And along with that, we also had our colleagues derive principles from these insights. So an example of a principle here is one-stop shop. And you see, one-stop shop is like a litmus test. You can validate against it during the design reviews, or you can tell if a concept passes or fails against that principle. So whenever we solved for our need statements, we continuously validated against principles during the design and the development cycles as well to ensure that the design meets the bar that we set for that user experience. So this is what we did, but along with that, there were a couple of mistakes that we that we realized later, and so we wanted to share some of the lessons that we learned with you all. So first, when we started combining the team maps and clustering those team maps, we moved from 11 teams to 7 maps based on the company size and the type of the company. So over here, it talks about agencies or like a large size company and so on. But what we realized we were treating these team personas as market segments. But team personas are not segments. They follow the same rule as personas. So they should be grouped by goals, like by common goals and by the team dynamics.
So another mistake we made was during the workshop. So during the workshop, we didn't give our colleagues enough time to absorb or ask questions about new concepts they were learning because we really wanted to keep them on track. But since they didn't understand what some things meant, they had a hard time identifying implications. So in the workshop schedule, leave ample time for discussion according to your colleagues' comfort with the domain. Additionally, help them document any new information they're learning so that they will absorb it and can keep referring back to it throughout the workshop.
Another thing that the mistake that we did was we expected them to come up with these need statements and principles at the get-go. But they could not do that because they did not know these concepts and how they related to each other. And what we learned was you need to set a very clear process and explain how insights will be turned into need statements and into design principles. So you need to cater to the research experience of your colleagues. And they may not come up with the perfect principles or needs, but the point really is to get them thinking in terms of the experience and not just the functionality. And you can evolve these principles and needs later after the workshop as well.
So another thing we learned was don't just leave it up to your colleagues to use need statements and principles after they're created. Habits don't just change overnight. So you need to really constantly remind your whole team to keep them on the user-centered track. I would say maybe even be a little annoying about it and sneak it in wherever you can. You can use this repetition to ensure that design flows crucial to the user don't get scoped out.
Yep. So now when we went back to designing, we did not refer to users as just as mere individuals, but we also started looking at their team dynamics. So we started thinking about the goals of the team, about how they work together, and also considered, as you can see here, new team members that we did not account for earlier. So to summarize, that really happened because of the following three things: understanding the user's team dynamics, mapping these team personas out with your colleagues, and ultimately using these measurable principles from these team personas during your development and design process. And these are essentially three parts of the team persona. It is not just an artifact, it is actually a framework that you need to use.
Yeah, you're right, Omkar. So just understanding our users isn't enough. You need to nail these three things. So that concludes our case study, but this is something we think could work for others. So if you think this might be something you'd like to try for your users, please reach out to us on Twitter or LinkedIn, and we'd love to give you the materials and see what you do with it and how you improve upon what we did.
Yep. So we have some time left over here, so we could open up the floor for questions or comments.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, thanks, Julia and Omkar. That was very very compact but full of useful information here. So we've already got some great questions here. While I'm running the questions, since I've noticed we've gotten more new people who've joined the session, I'm going to launch the 2-question poll again. This just helps us after the conference. We're going to look at the information, and that's going to determine the types of sessions we run in the future. But yeah, while we get into these questions, let's see. So yeah, so Jennifer actually has a very interesting question, which is what change have you seen in the product or process at IBM after you're using team personas versus individual personas?
So in terms of the process at IBM, I know that a bunch of teams reached out to us, both me and Julia, and in our different portfolios, we have been starting to use team personas. The team that I currently work on, we have been evolving that a little more, and a lot of our products, we actually have design principles that talk about focus on teams, not just on individuals. So a lot of those changes you have happened to see, and actually the way it shows up in the product
because we deliver continuously, it kind of takes a little time. But over the last 1 year, the couple of products that I've been working on have definitely seen that happen, have more of the collaboration aspects to it.
Should we go to our, sorry, against that. I meant to go back a couple slides, and one we kind of briefly had it, but we can show here a little more closely. So in our original, let's pop back to the beginning. In our original product, Omkar's better at tech than I am here for. So we had, oh, it's got to build. All right. So we had thought of these things as more of these siloed experiences. So we would create these whole experiences for web developers and a whole experience for mobile developers. Let's go to this 44 now.
Yep.
So, but what we realized, again, that those people were working on these omni-channel experiences. So we went, if you've seen this first just high-level wireframe, the information on there is essentially getting to what is the goal of the team. So taking a step back and being like, what type of app are you really trying to create? And then when we went into the flows, for example, this was a simple example on setting up authentication. We would have had separate flows for setting that up, and now we had something all in one place where when one type of developer would come in and set up a flow, they could see what another developer had done and kind of see the status there. And then also it raised these other types of users that we hadn't really understood how to bucket them really, or where they fit in, because it could be somebody who's doing many things. And we started to say, okay, you know, over here, like this one person is really needs to be able to see the status. And other places, they fit into, you know, the same personality or goals or motivations that the individual personas have, but over here, they have a specifically different need. And so we were able to design a status for that specific user.
Right, right. And there's actually a question here kind of about resourcing. And this is definitely relevant for the enterprise, where someone's asking, how are you guys able to get buy-in to work on a sort of internal project of this scale? Because it seems very involving, you know, to engage in the persona workshops and to speak to 40+ users and to really just take all of this on. Was it difficult to get this initiated?
Yeah. So I mean, if you think about it as an initiative, yes, it's pretty huge. But a lot of times the way when we did it for the first time, we actually had some of that research, and we actually were using some of the work or the research that was done previously. And along with that, we did our interviews as well. The team that I'm working on currently, at that point, when we went for a contextual inquiry visit to our customers, we started looking at it and doing interviews with like different people involved. So a lot of times, just simple changes like that will help you a lot.
I have something else to add too. When we originally did this, we again didn't think that we were doing team personas. We were looking for regular personas, but also it was pretty clear that we were struggling on the team of designers to design for these mobile development tools. But part of the way we won them over to doing this size of research was by establishing a user research pool, a recruiting pool of people who signed up to do more regular research with us. So our director was really interested in getting this group of current and potential customers together for us to research with, and we were able to use that to also start doing interviews with these teams that we were recruiting. So I'd say I'd also find a way to, I'm always looking for ways to really tack on research onto endeavors that maybe don't directly relate to doing interviews.
Right, right. And there's actually one other question here, which is, of course, very very important, and that is, what sort of criteria do you guys have for knowing when to use a persona or when to create a persona for a whole team of users versus for a individual user? Like, how do you make that judgment call?
Yeah.
So,
Good question.
yeah, I mean, we used to face this when we were doing this, had a similar thing as well. What we saw was it really depends on what your product or what your goal is with your product. A lot of times, the products that we work on, the goal is to improve collaboration between people. It's a CSCW system, a computer supported collaborative work, which means that people are going to be using your system to work on their tasks. When you see something like that, what you need to capture is this collaboration when you're looking at your users. And at that time, team persona becomes useful. So if we think of any of the products that I'm working on, like any scenario that you take, it cannot be completed by just one user. It requires the collaboration of a lot of different people. And unless you have that research data, you cannot really design for that. So that's when that's the main criteria that I use to see that.
Yeah, that's a really good one. And then another one, which I think comes to around why we originally decided to do this, was because we saw that there was this other major factor affecting our users, which was the type of team they were working on. So even though there were certain personality criteria that you would look for in a regular individual persona, between these different types of roles or users, we saw this pattern across people saying, look, at all of these people have to consider these really specific things because they're on this team. If this person went onto that team, it would be something different. So kind of seeing how much influence that team had on the product really was another defining factor.
Yeah.
Right. So also kind of mapping out how the people on these teams might also move between teams, and maybe they get reassigned to another team, and how that might affect what the product needs to do.
Yep.
Yeah.
Gotcha. And there's also been a theme of questions here, which is sort of around maintenance of this team persona, right? You sort of mentioned in there that these personas were dynamic, and I was just wondering if you could go into a little bit more detail on regarding that. Is it dynamic in the sense that you're using some tool that pulls updated data, and so you don't have to maintain it as often, or how do you handle the maintenance of this deliverable once it's created?
I'd say this is the classic persona question, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say right now we don't have a tool that automatically pulls in data. It still is owned. We actually discussed this a lot. It still seemed it needed to be owned by the researchers, and being the ones to, at least once a year or whatever you guys establish as your criteria, to go back and revisit and update with the new things that you've learned. I will say that, and this kind of relates to another question I saw about, why not breaking out into individual journey maps? These don't get rid of any of the individual journey maps or personas that you would need to do for a specific product release. This kind of just shows from end to end what that team is doing. And so it's still kind of at a certain way, a little bit higher level. So even though it is pretty massive from release to release, you still need to do your journey maps that might only have to do with one step of that process, depending on, what you're working on.
Yeah.
Or what your release is on.
Yeah, and totally. So as Julia said, certain parts remain the same, and certain parts change. We actually had, when we did it for the first time, we had talked about this being a system wherein whenever anybody sees, it's like when you see something, say something. So when our OMs and any product managers or developers or the design team had some new data, we were getting back to it and we were supposed to change it. On the current team that I'm working on, we actually have a larger push from our executive, wherein we are trying to get that up on a more of a website format, so that whenever people see it, they can submit a request, and ultimately researchers are the curators to ensure if they should change or not.
Gotcha. And once you had created these team personas, did you then show them back to the people that you researched them with? Or how did you sort of revalidate the information?
you did that, right, Julie, when you were?
Yeah, I did, and I'll say I would have liked to do it more thoroughly than I did, but I did it with every team. It was more of just one or two people from those teams, sort of the leads, we'd show back. And and we also showed it around to we had something like 300 engineers on our team or something. So showed it also, because this was with mobile developers, between showing it to mobile developers within IBM and then also to these different teams, they all had sort of that gut reaction of like, oh, this makes sense, this resonates, and had given some feedback that way.
Yes. And then, like, for the team that I'm currently working on, we structured our user feedback sessions when we did like a contextual inquiry trip with them. We had a bunch of contextual inquiries with the different members of the team, and we synthesized that and took them back to them and said, okay, this is what we see are the needs that are across the board. And so we kind of also made it part of these user research workshops, working sessions.
Gotcha.
That was another way.
Yeah, that makes sense. One question somebody has here is, they just want to get some clarification on. Would you say that this is really more of a supplementary technique for user research, where the individual personas are still important, or did you guys use these almost in lieu of the individual personas?
No, so individual personas are really important. I think what we have over here is, depending on the need of your product right now, you might want to focus on different things. So when we talk about this, it is that we were catering to different types of teams that were working together, and our scenarios were around that collaboration. But if there could also totally be scenarios wherein it's just for one individual to get things done. And for that scenario, you have to consider those different variances between like different personalities, which could be for the same team player, which could be for the same role, right? So it could be a mobile app developer, but there are different personalities of a mobile app developer. So at that time, you have to consider individual personas. So the idea is that, actually we have that on the slide over here. Yeah. So the way we have it mapped out here is that the developer is mapping to different teams, but on the same side, if you say that there is a mobile app developer, there could be different personalities of that mobile app developer role. And if that is what your team is currently focused on, if that is what your product is currently focused on, that is definitely something that you should focus on in the research as well.
Yeah. And one of the things that before we came to the realization about team personas, was we were saying, wait a minute, we're going to have like 50 personas, which renders them useless, right? Nobody can keep track of that. And what we realized here is there were still these certain things that, is personality types among developers. And then by understanding those personality types, and then realizing that when we thought this certain one might be 3 personas because one is in an enterprise and one is at a startup and have super different needs because of that. By understanding that really when the areas where it was the same person, for example, all developers like to do things I guess most, I don't want to say, but like by experimenting and trying things out. And then some developers like reading documentation. Those can be in any of these teams. So you understand that maybe people have these kinds of needs, and then you understand that when they're on these two different teams, they have these needs. It kind of gives you a system, a framework for understanding all of these variations without breaking it into 50 personas.
Yep, it's like a network.
It's a net, yeah.
Right. And once you had these team personas in place, how did you guys work with the internal product team to make sure that that this was actually used, right? That it didn't just sort of sit and gather dust as a deliverable. What sort of tactics did you guys use?
That was by being annoying. And that was with our principals. Because what we still found, we did a couple of these kind of workshops with different types of users, and some were ones who were more engineering focused, who already felt like they knew the user. Through doing this, they did in that moment have that like, oh, okay, I get it, this is different, and oh, let me take my background knowledge and contribute it. But after that, they would not have continued to use them. So by creating those criteria, those principles and need statements, we just started we brought them up every meeting that we had, and we everything we tested against, all of our testing criteria. Like if we had one about a one-stop shop, a user should be able to get everything right there in that place. When we tested, we would say, okay, you know, are you able to get everything you need here? And then always bring that back in. So really, it was
the repetition.
It was the repetition and testing and proving through testing, right? Just by having them read information doesn't prove that to them that this improves the product.
Yeah, and so along with repetition, I remember there was another thing. This is why we love Todd. What he said, and that's what we use a lot in that, was that basically it's not about creating beautiful maps, but the process of mapping. So when you talk about your extended teams, people are more likely to use something if they created it. So when we created these design principles, we created them with the team. So the words and things like that, when we started on with a new project with the product team, we made sure that they were also involved as we created these principles. Because then after that, it was like, oh, we made these. And people are more likely to remember these, and people are more likely to use them.
Yeah.
Right. That's actually a very, very important point. That collaboration isn't important just for making sure you get everyone's ideas and you uncover sort of the hidden parts, but it's also important as a very sort of subtle and psychological way to get people to actually want to use the thing that you're making because they were a part of that, right? And it's much easier to sort of convince somebody that way.
Yep.
Interesting. So the next question we have here is about the persona itself. You know, when you create an individual persona, right, you sometimes will have primary, secondary, maybe even a tertiary audience that you're considering.
Oh, yeah.
Was that the same here for team personas, that you sort of had those different tiers?
I have to go back to that thing.
Sure. I'd say, I guess there's a couple, because the team is working on this more scale level, there's a couple ways. So first there's, I guess, which of these teams is secondary, tertiary, et cetera, and the team members. So we also first started by saying, okay, here's all of the team members, which was also quite a lot. And that's when we realized we did need to do that interview to understand all of the key members, but then really focus all of the team members and then really focus more still on the key, essentially the primary ones. In the personas themselves, I'd say that there could have been we haven't really come up with a good way of keeping track of all of those and kind of switching between them. Between our key members on certain products, they would be able to identify of the key members which are the individual ones they're focusing on more. But I'll just, to that point, we understood who all those people were and then realized that we still had to combine certain roles, or, you know, that maybe legal didn't make as much sense to talk about with mobile teams.
Got it. Now, does the size of the user team in this case impact the team persona? So say, for instance, let's say you're creating a team persona for like a sales org with 400 people versus an IT team with just 10 people in it, right? Does that then warrant sort of different, almost like sub-team personas then for that sales org, or is it still just, you know, one persona per team?
So we actually came across that for another product that I was working on, wherein the teams seem to be large, right? Similar to what you're talking about with an IT org. And I can tell what we did. What we saw was there were these subdivisions in that larger team, wherein people were basically doing the same. They were doing the same thing. So it was one role, and there were multiple people who were performing that same role. And what we saw was we could take up, like almost like slice them up and say that, okay, these 4 roles are working together in that larger team. So even if it is like a large, I think at that time it was, I think 50 or 60 people team that was working together, you still had 4 to 5 roles, distinct roles, and you had multiple people playing those roles. So we could still kind of reduce them down into those key roles that matter.
So are you basically saying they were still the same team persona?
Yeah, so like mobile development teams, right? Like you could have multiple app developers, but they were still all mobile developers.
Right.
And so on.
Yeah, and I think this kind of goes into that point that we got caught up on that initially. And that's when we realized we were looking at it more like segmentation, because we were saying, well, this is a big team, that's a small team, they should be separate. But that's when we say, thinking about the team goals and team dynamics, if you have and this is a very basic example, but a developer who kind of works on everything alone, and then you have that team dynamic is them doing everything, right? And then if you have one who's working with many mobile developers, and maybe they're specifically Android, and there's somebody who's iOS, they're not a generalist, they're working very specifically and doing lots of collaboration with other team members. That's how you would differentiate. Even though this example does speak to like one team member versus many, it's not the number, it's who they have to interact with and how.
Gotcha. And here we've actually have another question, which looks back at the collaborative process that you guys use to create and use these team personas. So if somebody is considering creating a team persona, and obviously that requires a lot of user research interviews, and they're not able to get, let's say, their product manager, their developer, other people of their internal team to join in and see these interviews firsthand, how would you recommend that they still be able to synthesize all that data again? Is it recording the interviews and then making them watch it? Is it something else that you guys found was useful?
So that's going to always be the struggle, right? You know if they come, it'll be useful for them, but you can't get people to do it. They have other things, not to their detriment, but anyway. So basically, we initially kind of struggled with how much information to include them in, because you need to reach that balance and figure out both what will give them that impact, and think about what's their aha moment and what they need to learn. And then also you're doing a lot of the cleaning, and you're kind of, as researchers, kind of identifying what's the more salient information. So you are doing a lot of filtering and cleaning that up for them, but to give them something that's more consumable.
Yeah, and Ben, just to clarify here, you were talking about the fact that the extended team members, like the product managers and developers, cannot come to the interviews, or are you talking about not being able to come for the synthesized like presentations or something like that? Which of those were?
Yeah, I think the question here was more around how do you sort of synthesize all this research that you do in a way that is understandable for people who can't attend the actual in-person interviews, right? Say like your developer can't join you on these user interviews. How do you take all of this information from 42, user interviews and make it digestible and make him actually care and understand the information?
So I see. So I think that is what we referred to earlier, which was basically, if you see here, until this point, until step number 3, it was Julie and I who were like doing this research and clustering them into more so these journey maps and team overviews. And so once you have the team overview blurb and you have the journey map blurb, then you bring in your team to walk through that. So in that way, they don't have to be part. They were never part of our 42 interviews. What they were part of was that workshop, which happened in 1 day or 2 days.
No, it was a week. half day for a week, I think.
Yeah, so
Right?
sorry.
It was 4, I think it was 4 days. Anyway, which the workshop is going to that point. I mean, the workshop is going to take some time, and people like to say, can't you just do this in an hour, as much as they can. You need to figure out, it's basically a balance of what they really, they're interested in knowing what they need to know and how they like to learn and what you want them to know as well. So when we did the workshop we're referring to, these were people who really had needed all of the information, were really struggling to understand the domain. When we did another one with by the way, the engineering roles didn't all show up to that. So we did another one with those roles who only would give us a couple hours. We walked them through just slices. This actually kind of shows, we'd pick the slices that were really relevant to them and that we really wanted to speak about and have more in-depth conversations around those. On my current team, something we did was we played out scenarios with skits. Omkar did a different one where he had them.
Yeah, we did 1-day workshops. So in that case, but people were.
You had them each take on one of these team personas essentially.
Yep, we did
right?
a role-playing manner, but we did it in a 1 day.
Right. So that's basically, they won't come. You can do recordings and play them back if that's what you think will be extra effective for them. It's really up to you to figure out what is most effective, but you aren't dumping all of those 42 interviews on them, and you are doing a lot of the synthesis and cleaning up and grouping before you bring them to anything.
Right. And in terms of actually talking to all the users, how are you guys able to get access to them? Because especially in the enterprise, it can be very difficult sometimes to get access to the actual end users themselves, right? So how are you guys able to get access to so many accurate end users?
This deserves its own entire talk because this was quite an endeavor. It took a long time. With another researcher, and I actually took that on to, again, try to create some way to more easily access people. We reached out to everybody we knew, everybody in our organization, to reach out to people that they knew. And we had a deck where we would walk them through, in 15 minutes, what they could get from interacting with us. We had to really think about what they could get from us, not just what we could get from them. It actually took a few months to get those groups together. So once we got those, that's when we would fly in for a day and interview all of the people on that team, all those key members that we could, and the whole team. And then try to show them things that would be interesting enough for them to continue working with us. Gotcha.
And so just to give people an idea of the scale of just the project of creating these team personas, how much time would you say that this whole endeavor took, sort of front to back for you guys?
It took a long time for the first one.
Yeah, so the first time we did it, I think we started, remember, I think in April or so.
Mm-hmm.
And then we did our workshop at the end of May.
Yeah, this was again before we even realized that it would be team personas. That was part of the process, the discovery process. The recruiting for the users took about, I think, 2 months.
Yes.
So I would say that was quite lengthy, but since then.
Yeah, I mean, for the latest one that we did, it probably took a month for us to schedule, set up, and actually conduct the research and synthesize. And another month later, we were doing workshops, and we did around this time we did around So by the time we got to the entire team, it took a couple of months.
Yeah.
But really, in terms of getting that workshop material ready, it took us less than 2 months, I would say.
And I would say, just quickly to add to that, it was a really big endeavor, but then we used these for several more months than it took to just create them. I think they're actually still being used.
Right. And would you say that this was kind of like a full-time endeavor for both of you, or was this just another sort of project that you guys worked on?
It's full-time for me.
Yeah.
I was so fully focused on research at that point.
Yeah, it was like a part-time for me, but then it gained momentum, and then I had to work full-time on that. So, so for the people who are asking that question, like, yeah, a lot of times we have to take it on as like a side project, and later on it'll gain momentum, and then
yeah. But that, I mean, speaks to that's also just a general struggle with research. You need to really try to get your people on board to let you do discovery research and the such. Otherwise, for any creating personas, team personas, any sort of discovery research, you need to come up with scrappier ways of putting everything together.
Right. And were all of these interviews that you conducted, were they in person or were any of them remote?
It was both. We did at least half were in person, which included us flying, but we couldn't get our team to fly us internationally.
Yeah.
So we would convince, basically, we would convince them to do in person for our initial visit. Also to get, that actually really helped with the recruiting, by the way, getting that face-to-face, like relationship making
and pictures
piece, taking pictures for the team personas. Also, I should have mentioned, to do that whole recruiting thing, we got a product manager who had a lot of influence in our team we convinced him that this was worthwhile. And so he did a lot of helping out with that too. Our follow-up interviews were mostly remote.
Gotcha. And now somebody actually has I think a pretty interesting question, which is, so when you're creating a team-based persona, does fluency with like technology play a role in deciding, where somebody goes? So for instance, if you have let's say if you have one person who, or let's say you have two people, right? And they're both in the same role. They both fulfill the same role, but one is more technologically apt than the other person. How would you represent that in a team persona? Or is that something you would save for like individual personas?
That is exactly that's the previous thing that we were talking about. Is you might have a particular role or a team player, which is in that team, but in reality you might have different personalities in that team for that role. So it could be somebody who is just onboarding onto that team and does not have a lot of technical depth on work that they're working on. Some of them might be a tinkerer. One of them might be someone who uses default. So those are the individual personalities that vary across a particular role, and that's for that you need to consider individual personas.
Yeah, and you know what? Team personas, we focus more on roles, which regular personas should not be role-based, right? They're more personality-based. But because of what Omkar was just speaking of and the question, we needed to just really understand as a whole, what is everything that needs to happen, and all the collaboration happens in steps. So that, if you think of it more like that, if those two are in the actual same role with same tasks, you would represent them the same on the team persona and understand them at that level on the individual.
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha. And the, let's see here. So for these actual team, or let's say so when you're actually conducting the user interviews for the purposes of your team personas, do you find that the questions you ask are different than the ones you would ask when you're trying to when you're working to create an individual persona, or are they pretty similar?
They were different a little bit in that we asked, sorry, somebody had to come in and grab their charger. So we had a different script. So we had a script, I think in general what they're getting at the same information. It's about, sorry about that. It's about structuring how you get that information. So we had one script to talk to the whole team, and then a different script for each of the roles that we were speaking with. So
and what you guys, I think if I remember correctly, for each individual interview, you guys also talked about, okay, tell us your journey and who are you collaborating with. So things like that. So the points of collaboration were definitely something that they focused on.
Yeah, more emphasized. Yeah.
And the individual journey. And then you could, based on multiple, when you interview everybody, you see that there are patterns across these individuals working together.
Yes, and that was a good point, and it reminds me of another thing that we did was we were really trying to look at the end-to-end steps for the team. So we went and outlined with them what were all of the high-level steps, and I actually made little cards for those, and then had each person kind of rank where they fell in and if they did, and also correct the steps when they, build on them. So the understanding of those end-to-end steps evolved over time, and we got an understanding of who was involved where, but had them think when I used to talk to developers and I said, okay, tell me about your process, they would start at the point of development. They would never think about planning and the planning that they were doing and that collaboration with the other roles on their team before.
Yep.
So I think that was another key thing, was to have them think end to end rather than just their role.
Yep.
Gotcha. Yeah, thank you so much, Julia and Omkar. We're pushing up on the hour, so unfortunately that is the last question that we'll be able to get to. But this is very interesting work, and I think a lot of people found value in this as a user research tactic, because a lot has been said about individual personas, but to look at personas as a unit of people fulfilling the same role is like a very interesting dimension to approach it. And I think it's very relevant for complex and robust enterprise apps that touch multiple groups of people in an organization. So this has been great, kind of lifting the hood on your process here. And thank you everybody for all of your questions. Unfortunately, we couldn't get to all of them, but we do have product tribes here where if you have more than 3 years of experience in a product team, we encourage you to apply here, where the conversation continues. We have over 2,200 designers, product managers, and developers in the Slack community, and we have a dedicated virtual lobby for this conference. And next week, this recording and all the recordings will be sent out through email, as well as the slide decks. And yeah, this concludes day 1 of our 4-day virtual summit. So tomorrow at the same time, 9 a.m. Pacific time, we will get back into it for another full day of sessions with our speakers. But again, Omkar and Julia, thank you both for sharing your work here. And yeah, hopefully. Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure. And everybody here, hope to see you tomorrow morning and throughout the day tomorrow as well. And yeah, otherwise, have a great rest of your day. Take care, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. You too.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.